This is difficult. I'm going to say no because I'm a hater. Welcome back to On Deadline, the Washington Examiner's political game show. I'm Christian Daytalk.
And I'm Tiana Lodesher.
Every episode, we bring you the biggest news in politics, deliver our takes, and then you get to vote on a winner at the end. Don't forget to like this episode, subscribe to the channel, and share us with your friends. Like we do every episode, we're starting above the fold, and there's really only one story we need to talk about. Tiana, Donald Trump announced major plans for Washington, D.C. on Monday. What exactly was his announcement, and where do you think this leads us in terms of having a potentially militarized police force in the country?
Donald Trump has announced Liberation Day specifically for the nation's capital. He is invoking Section 740 of the D.C. Home Rule Act and deploying the National Guard to crack down on crime in D.C. For some background here, in the Constitution, D.C. is supposed to be federally governed, and this was the case for most of the nation's history. It was then, like all terrible things about modernity, an LBJ plan that Richard Nixon executed to pass the D.C. Home Rule Act, which gives D.C. more local governance than it would have otherwise. Trump is using a stipulation in order to have more federal oversight, specifically as it pertains to crime, which, to be clear, remains a problem. Although violent crime has gone down, it peaked in 2023, it still remains astronomically above other major cities, right? We're looking at last year, we had a rate of 28 violent crimes per 100,000 residents, and specifically, Trump is focusing on juvenile crime. We had juvenile crime increase by 5% last year alone, so unlike the other forms of violent crime, it is not going down. Over the weekend, Trump's impending announcement could not have seemed any more prescient, and that was because down in Navy Yard, which historically is one of the more affluent, well-governed areas of the city, you had about 100 teenagers, young people, breaking out into a shooting. The city has imposed a curfew in that neighborhood. There are a couple curfews around town. But the major problem here is that the juvenile crime issue seems to totally defy all the other national trends. So now the question is how effective will this be? Is this situation unique in D.C., or is this just Trump, trying to get one in on a blue city that he's in close proximity to?
It's interesting, and I think there isn't necessarily a straight answer. For the record, what Donald Trump is proposing, not even proposing, he's already done this, and he started doing it over the weekend. He mobilized 800 or so National Guard troops. He can do that legally, again, thanks to the Home Rule Act, in D.C. He's also federalizing the Metropolitan Police Department. And, the devil's advocate argument here is that the district, for the last God knows how long, at least as long as I've been in D.C., over a decade, the city and their progressive reforms when it comes to sentencing and criminal justice reform, they've not only not helped the problem, they've actually made it worse. Now, that being said, what Donald Trump also told us in this press conference is that he's considering doing this in places like New York City, Chicago, which would be illegal. He cannot use military assets as a police force inside the country. I think even some Democrats would admit the crime problem in D.C. is not tenable, right?
Yeah.
Like you mentioned before, violent crime is not going down like it is in states like New York or Illinois or even California to a lesser extent. But I do think this is part of Donald Trump's long-running feud, not only with Muriel Bowser, the mayor, who, believe it or not, has actually cozied up to Trump remarkably during the second term.
He's brought D.C. back. Highest metro ridership since, the pandemic.
Yeah.
So there are parts of it that are good for her. It could be a sticking point, though. So let's talk about the limitations of what Trump can do in D.C.
Okay.
Because while the law enforcement element is crucial, Jeanine Pirro points out that although she's the D.C. prosecutor for adults, she cannot prosecute anyone under the age of 18 unless they are charged with rape, murder, even violent crimes that do not result in a death. She cannot prosecute. So it can stay in the wheelhouse of the local prosecutors. This has led some Republicans like Mike Lee to say, let's overturn or greatly amend DC home rule. One other element is truancy, which most of the statisticians who've been following this think that there is a direct correlation between DC's truancy rate and the youth crime issue in particular. So the Washington Post, again, not exactly a conservative outlet, they said that 16,000 kids in DC were classified as truant in the last school year. And truancy, that's 2 weeks of absences without an excuse. So that is not, I was sick and my mom called in, or I had to go to a family reunion and my dad called in. That is just, you do not show up. The 18,000 reports of truancy over the last 3 years went uninvestigated. DC public school truancy rate has more than doubled in the past decade, and I think this is the scariest stat. In the last school year, a third of all middle schoolers were truant, and the majority of high schoolers were truant. That is something I don't think anything with as long as the Home Rule Act stands, there's nothing Trump can do about that, because
Correct.
that's all about that is not quite at the purview. Like, does Muriel Bowser need to break out her inner Kamala Harris and start jailing the parents of truant children?
I'm not going to comment on that, but I do think you're right. Like, this is one effort from Donald Trump, but it's not going to fix the problem entirely. It might potentially scare some of these kids into not carjacking random people or, whatever you have. But, like, this takes serious reforms, not only from the city, but potentially from Congress. I mean, Donald Trump is calling for legislation, which, for the record, let's be honest, has absolutely no chance of passing, that would effectively outlaw cashless bail at the federal level, which, again, you're going to need Democratic support for this. So, like, the way he is addressing this problem, I don't think is effective necessarily. He's pulling from his bag of tricks that he's used in the past. Mobilize the National Guard. It's shock and awe. And again, maybe it's a first step, but it feels to me very much like a slippery slope. In that press conference on Monday, you had Attorney General Pam Bondi, FBI Director Kash Patel, Jeanine Pirro, formerly a judge and, of course, a Fox News host, and the current district attorney in D.C. talking about this ends now. But then in the next breath, they're talking about we need help. And so, like, I just think this is a fallacy. And I say that because just last week, the White House itself was touting massive reductions in crime in every single city in the country in 2024. They thought the idea would be that, Donald Trump is restoring law and order, until they realized Donald Trump wasn't actually president in 2024. So this is an effort to, one, sort of take back the shine from the previous administration. But then again, we've talked about this at length, week after week after week on this show. They're hiding the ball. Donald Trump last week announced he's going to meet Vladimir Putin, which we're going to talk about later on Friday. We also on Monday got the notice that the grand jury testimony relating to Ghislaine Maxwell will not be unsealed as requested by the Justice Department. I just think this is like not specifically an issue that Trump should be focusing on right now. And I do think, again, the way that Democrats have moved on immigration to an extent over the last 2 years, the way they've started talking about crime in a different light, this is a wave that is already breaking, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, anything that comes from this isn't going to be specifically because Donald Trump sent 800 guardsmen into D.C. It's because the country as a whole, and even this city, which, again, has been democratically run forever, is realizing that what they've been doing wasn't working. Now, when we look at, I guess, and this is what scares me, the prospects of these policies being replicated in other parts of the country, specifically Chicago, specifically New York. Do you, as a conservative, as a, at least on this show, the card-carrying Trump supporter, right, does that not scare you at all?
I mean, it depends on to what end.
Okay.
If you are doing an ICE raid where you have reason to believe you have people who have been convicted of violent crimes or suspected ties to terrorist organizations, that seems obviously in the purview of the federal government, especially in the absence of local law enforcement being allowed to do the job. If you're just combating street crime, that could be different. Now, I just want to say on a personal level, I 100% welcome this for purely the selfish reason that I love DC. We work here. You live here. I live in Northern Virginia. I live on the DC subway system. I take it to work every single day. And I can honestly say the state of things has gotten dramatically better since Trump became president for a couple of reasons. But first and foremost, the return to office order has meant that the metro can't be just an open air drug den.
Yeah.
And there still is a lot of ways to go because the fact is COVID broke this city in a way that it didn't break much of many other blue cities, right? New York City feels pretty much back. Downtown DC, where this office is pretty much a waste, right? So many storefronts that are just empty, old restaurants that have been shuttered and haven't been replaced. Some of that is, the work from home order, which Trump is fixing. Another part is crime, and another sense is just the general miasma of lawlessness, of pot scent everywhere, kids who are not in school, homeless vagabonds who take up all the benches at the park. It makes it so it is less livable in terms of just ways that the data can't even capture. It's just and I know I have been the victim of a violent crime in DC. I've been assaulted by a random person on the streets. This was before COVID. Called the police, no arrests made. One of my best friends who has been maced and attacked by, again, a group of truant girls. No arrests made. Time for yays and nays when we give our opinions on the news of the week. Sometimes we'll agree, but other times we'll disagree.
Corporations will continue to eat the costs of Trump's tariffs. This is difficult. I'm going to say no because I'm a hater, and I think it looks like you're going to disagree with me, so get into it.
So, yes, with an asterisk.
Okay.
So, Goldman Sachs came out with its first big analysis of the tariffs through June and its projection where we're kind of in like a stasis after we finally met Trump's, 90-day plus a month plus whatever deadline, where we more or less know where the tariffs sit. So at the start of the year, the average weighted tariff rate on all imports into the U.S. was about 2.3%. Now it's 18. By the end of June, I think it was like 13.
Okay.
13 to 18 is a better increase than 13 to, 49% or whatever the original Liberation Day schedule was. But it's not nothing, right?
Yeah.
It is an increase. So Goldman estimated that through June, the overwhelming majority of the cost has been borne by businesses, about 64%. Consumers have borne 22%, and foreign exporters only 14%, right? The projection through the rest of the year, if the tariffs go forward as they are right now, they say that businesses and consumers will basically switch the burden. So consumers will bear 2/3 of the expense, businesses about 10%, and foreign exporters still only 1/4. The reason why I say corporations will still bear a lot of the burden is because the import costs are still, you have a company, like let's say you have a car company, and even if you build the car in the US, or even if you are USMCA compliant with Mexico, which means no import, none of the 25% addendum tariff, just 0% tariff. Let's say you need aluminum or steel from another country in order to import that. Then you're doing 25% import costs. So there is a reason why manufacturing employment have gone down, but I think we've lost 32,000 manufacturing jobs in the last 3 months alone. So corporations will pay the price in a way that won't necessarily show up in the exact data. It will be because the biggest concern with tariffs has never really been inflation, but rather economic growth. The inflationary, even Goldman concedes that inflation, which is core PCE for June, was 2.8%. They said that without the tariffs, it would be 2.4. That's sizable, it's statistically significant, but that's not a massive amount. And over time, it's not as though the tariffs are expected to have a prolonged effect. It's that, You have a one-time, let's say, take 6 months for the cost to trickle in, and then inflation levels off over the next year. But the growth hampering, that's real. Companies will permanently have to say, all right, well, we can't afford to import however many tons of aluminum. We only have this fixed amount that we can afford. So then you have less employment.
Okay. I agree with you. And, I do want to talk about the projections for a second, because projections, as soon as Trump came into office, was that this is going to be incredibly inflationary. And we haven't exactly seen that borne out yet in the price data. Prices on a lot of commodities are up, especially food prices and energy prices. You would think with what they're doing in terms of boosting domestic drilling and oil production, that would help alleviate some of that pressure. But the problem here doesn't actually have to do with economic theory. It has to do with capitalism. This is America, right? What did Joe Biden tell us when he was trying to rewrite his tax code? The richest need to pay their fair share. Corporations need to suck it up. You can be a billionaire, I don't care about that, but you shouldn't be paying less than a school teacher or something like that. This is more or less what Donald Trump is doing. He is telling these companies to, in perpetuity, because these tariffs are, in his mind, going to be permanent, just suck it up and accept that they will make fewer profits. Their profit margins will be smaller. But this is a closed system, right? The world isn't run by modern monetary theory, the school prescribed to by AOC and other progressives, which essentially says that debt isn't real and we can spend our way out of every single social problem existing in the modern society. These companies have a finite set of capital with which they can either expand their businesses, grow, like you pointed to, or compensate their workers. So even if prices aren't up at, say, Walmart or on Amazon.com, or at your local grocery store, those people working for those companies will make less money.
Yes.
And that will eventually filter out to the entire country. Now, I do think one of the reasons we haven't seen price increases come up necessarily is because these big firms, whether they are the actual companies themselves or American importers, really didn't know where the line was going to be with the tariffs. We had seen retailers declining to raise prices, even if their import costs were up on some of those sectoral goods, specifically the steel and aluminum and copper components. But now that it's August and all of these tariffs are implemented, with the exception of China, and we might be having an announcement on that as you're watching this episode, Trump kept moving the goalposts. But now this is here and this is happening. And collectively, as a whole, all of these companies are going to have an opportunity to say, well, we continue to be good stewards of our consumers at home, or we can do what we've done forever, and that's to make as much money as we possibly can.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a problem. I mean, America is a capitalist society. But Donald Trump is out of his mind if, just like Joe Biden, he thinks these companies are going to willingly make less money, right?
Yeah.
So it will eventually, the bill will come due. American consumers or American workers, however you want to frame it, your buying power will be limited, either because of increased prices or decreased wages. And I don't think that is a trap that the Trump administration can necessarily get out of.
No, and frankly, I think the alternative to this is what Trump has done with NVIDIA. So NVIDIA now is saying, so effectively, the White House is charging an export license. They are saying 15% of all profits that NVIDIA makes selling chips in China has to go back to the federal government. It's a 15% effective export license. That, to me, makes far more sense because it is focused on the national security priority of decoupling from China, gives the government revenue, and doesn't punish American consumers. Again, half of this just goes back to the Peter Navarro bonkers, conspiracy theories about how trade balances work and the idea that it's bad for America to have a trade deficit, which it's not a bad thing for reasons that we've explained on the show in ample length. But the tariff issue for Trump is that, yes, it hasn't harmed inflation too much. Even in Goldman's projections, it won't have too much inflationary power. Yes, it is coupled with the pro-growth policies in one big beautiful bill. But in the end, if Donald Trump's whole game is cut the interest rates, this ain't it.
All right, now it's time for us to fill in the blank.
Trump's invitation to meet Putin on U.S. soil is giving.
It's giving confusion to me for any number of reasons. I think first and foremost, we'd seen Trump do a major 180 in terms of his handling of Vladimir Putin, Volodymyr Zelensky, and the greater war between Ukraine and Russia in the last 2 months or so. One that I think we both agreed was a positive development. But now he is inviting Vladimir Putin to come to Alaska for a face-to-face meeting, the first of his second term in office, which, normally dialogue is good. That would be a productive sign towards reaching a ceasefire. But at that Monday press conference we talked about at the top, he also talked about at this meeting and how he thinks a good deal includes Ukraine giving up pretty much all of the territory that Russia has taken. So it's confusing to me because he's sending mixed signals. That being said, it's going to be confusing also if what I fear to happen might actually happen, and that Donald Trump has invited Vladimir Putin to Alaska, to Russian soil, so that he can take him out. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I genuinely don't know. It would end the war for sure.
Yeah.
But it might kick off another war? I don't know. I mean, Trump is so unpredictable. It just boggles the mind trying to, predict his foreign policy or figure out how he is feeling on any certain issue on any given day. What do you think about this?
As one side note, I know the protocol for visiting or traveling dictators is really weird.
Yeah.
Like Kim Jong-un does not, when he travels to other countries, he does not use a regular toilet because he does not want foreign governments to have access to his fecal matter and be able to extrapolate data from his DNA. It's really, I would not be surprised if Putin even comes, which is a massive if.
Yeah.
He is only going to be eating food that is prepared by, his own chefs. He is not going to be drinking water from the tap. Everything will be controlled from a biosecurity standpoint.
Certainly.
I think this is giving last chance energy.
Ooh.
There are lots of parallels between how this has been going and how the end of the Trump-Iran negotiations went.
Yes.
You have Steve Witkoff doing, weekly excursions to Russia to meet Putin directly.
Yeah.
You have them nominally saying, we're open to a deal that is very favorable on your terms, and we've hit the end of the deadline. So Trump gave Russia a 50-day deadline. He truncated to 2 weeks. That terminated last Friday. Putin has agreed tentatively to meet Trump in Alaska this Friday. There was no word on whether or not Zelensky would come in some capacity or if he would have a representative there or just be in town. Now, everyone seems on board with a deal. For the first time in a long time, Ukrainians finally, it's about 2/3 of Ukrainians polled by Gallup, say they do want some sort of a negotiated settlement. You have the head of NATO, who's in this fun new bromance with Trump, applauding him for doing this. But the proposal that Putin has, again, is politically tenuous because he's saying that Russia would retain Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea, and that would be legally and internationally recognized. But the Putin proposal does not have any stipulations about Ukraine's other security guarantees from other nations. We imagine that he would want to ensure that Ukraine doesn't join NATO, but nothing else is currently on the table. Putin has every reason to accept any deal that Trump puts in front of him, and that's simply because they can't afford to do this anymore.
Yeah.
I think it's 1/3 of the government's revenue comes from oil. And they're right now posting an almost double-digit inflation rate with 20% interest rates. Mm-hmm. So if Putin comes, or worse, if he doesn't come at all, that means Trump will probably pull the trigger on these secondary sanctions on Russian oil.
Without a doubt.
That will decimate the Russian economy. Putin saw that Trump's not bluffing with at least with the Iranians. He gave them 60 days, and on the 61st of the Iranians, messing with him, took out their entire nuclear weapons capacity. What happens on the metaphorical 51st day here? I don't think Vladimir Putin wants to find out.
Yeah, I think you're right. But that being said, I think we all want to find out, but you're going to have to wait until next week because that's all the time we've got for this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this one, send it to your friends, and check out more of our great reporting at washingtonexaminer.com. I'm Christian Daytalk.
And I'm Tiana Lodesher.
And we'll see you guys next week.